Diddy trial day 21. Jane's body wounds revealed. 13% physical damage. Diddy screams. The federal courthouse in Manhattan stood rigid in the morning light, a stone-faced giant amid camera flashes and murmuring crowds. Inside, beneath the silent weight of oak panels and federal seals, the air was already thick with expectation. The gallery was full eyes, focused forward. Phones, silence, pens ready. And then she walked in. Jane, her real name sealed by court order, moved through the aisle with practiced detachment. The anonymity of her pseudonym did little to soften the scrutiny. She wore black again like the day before, but her steps today were heavier, her jaw set firmer. A single glance swept the courtroom. Then she took her seat. This was her second day on the stand. Opposite her sat Sean Combs, flanked by his high-profile legal team expression unreadable. Where yesterday was defined by direct testimony recounting years of control, manipulation nights arranged not for love but performance today would be different. Today the defense had the floor. Tenny Garagos, the defense attorney, was already standing. Her heels echoed with each step toward the witness box, her demeanor poised. The strategy was clear, not to deny the events outright, but to blur them, cast doubt, invert logic, weaponize Jane's own words against her. "Let's begin with these messages," Garagos said smoothly, raising a folder, the color of dry blood. "You recognize them?" Jane didn't hesitate. "Yes. They're yours. Yes." The screen lit up behind them, projecting text messages, sent by Jane, words laced with flirtation, desire control. Lines like, "What are you doing, baby, horny for me?" And "I'm picking up the pills now. Want the red ones or blue?" There were murmurs in the gallery. The text painted a picture far removed from the victim narrative laid out the day before. Garagos circled like a veteran. "You weren't being forced here, were you? You were coordinating, facilitating, even enjoying it." "I thought I was loved," Jane replied, her voice steady but low. "I was trying to hold on to that." "But you planned those hotel nights, ordered clothing, picked out matching shorts for escorts and Mr. Combs. That's not coercion, that's choreography. I was told it was how things worked, that it was expected. And on your birthday, Garagos pressed you, sent a message after a hotel night with 3 escorts thanking him. You said you loved every detail. Is that how someone feels after abuse?" Jane blinked. "I was separating what happened with him from the rest. I was grateful for what felt like care, not what followed. But there was no physical force, was there?" Garagos asked, voice rising an inch. "Not with hands, with power." It landed. The prosecution sat still, faces unreadable, and then came the video. A grainy recording taken on Jane's phone, projected for the jury. In it, Sean Combs's voice could be heard soft, rhythmic, making kissy sounds, saying things like, "You're my queen, and we lift each other up." It was meant to comfort. Maybe it had, but today played out of context, it was ammunition. Garagos smiled slightly. "Sounds like someone who cares deeply, doesn't it?" Jane's eyes didn't move from the screen. "Sometimes," she said, "that's how control works." Outside the courtroom, a storm was building. Protesters lined the block, some shouting for justice, others holding up signs claiming this was a witch hunt. Online videos clipped from yesterday's testimony had already gone viral. Some sympathetic, some brutal. Back in the courtroom, the cross-examination turned surgical. Jane was asked about high-end restaurants, Poppy Steak Carbone, places she'd suggested Combs take her to. "You were complaining he didn't take you out," Garagos said. "So you requested elite locations." "I was locked in a hotel for weeks," Jane replied. "I was asking to be seen or spoiled." Jane's lips parted slightly. Seen, not silenced. For the next hour, messages continued. Threads about trips, gift bags, diamonds. An expensive necklace, allegedly a birthday present. A new purse. All lined up by the defense to suggest a transactional consensual relationship. Not abuse, not coercion. But the prosecution had one asset left: silence. It came at the end after a particularly harsh exchange. Garagos asked why Jane had continued texting Combs expressing love, even when she claimed to feel disgusted. I loved the version of him he let me see, Jane answered. Then paused, her breath caught, and because I couldn't afford to stop, no one moved. The air in the room cooled. Even the judge, until then impassive, shifted slightly in his chair. Across the courtroom, Combs didn't blink. Jane's hands gripped the wooden edge of the witness box, not trembling, just holding. The court recessed 20 minutes later. Outside, she stepped into a blur of flashes, voices, movement. Her lawyer shielded her with an umbrella, even though it wasn't raining. Reporters shouted questions she didn't answer. Back inside, the courtroom emptied slowly. And still her voice echoed, not with hands, with power. Tomorrow the defense would continue, but today had already redrawn the lines. Not of guilt, not of innocence, of belief and betrayal. Morning returned to the federal courthouse like a second act, waiting for its curtain call. Outside, the crowd had doubled. Protesters with homemade signs now stood alongside curious onlookers and media vans blinking red with live coverage. Reporters rehearsed sound bites. Security grew tighter. Something in the city seemed to brace itself. Inside, Jane was already seated. There was a stillness to her, a kind of practiced calm that no longer looked like strength, but necessity. Her hair was pulled back today tighter than before. No makeup, no jewelry. Only the courtroom light softened the sharpness of her jaw. Tenny Garagos resumed her position. The defense attorney's tone was cordial, but pointed, every word polished like a courtroom blade. "We're going to continue, Miss Jane," she said, turning toward the jury. "Yesterday you claimed emotional manipulation. Today let's examine whether your actions support that claim." A message appeared on the courtroom screen. A text from Jane to Diddy, sent hours after what she had testified, was a coercive encounter. "Thank you for the night. I know you meant every part. You make me feel seen." The room didn't move, but energy shifted. Jane looked at the message, then at Garagos. "That's what I told him, not what I told myself. Excuse me, there's what you say to survive. And there's what you believe when you're alone." Garagos raised a brow. "So now survival looks like flattery." Jane didn't flinch. "It looks like a woman trying not to disappear." There were no murmurs in the gallery today. The weight of each sentence was heavier than reaction. A camera clicked once and was immediately silenced. The cross-examination intensified. They spoke about the hotel in Miami, a luxury space with ocean views and marble floors. Jane had been there for 10 days. She ordered no room service. She left only once escorted. Her keycard records showed, did not open the hallway door from the outside. "Did he lock you in?" Garagos asked. "No." Jane said he didn't need to. That's how control works. "But you had access to a phone. You had Instagram. You posted pictures smiling." "Yes." "You smiled." "Yes." "Why?" "Because people believe what they can see more than what they're told. If I had screamed with my eyes, no one would have noticed." It was a strange kind of testimony. Not loud, not linear. More like glass cracking slowly across its surface. The defense pivoted to gifts. There had been a necklace, diamond clusters, valued at $37,000. Jane wore it during a gala event, captured by photographers and later reposted to fan accounts. "You smiled that night too." "I performed," she corrected. "So everything is performance." "Where does truth live for you, Jane?" Jane leaned forward slightly. "In the parts no one claps for." That answer hung in the room like fog. Judge Kelman scribbled something into his notebook, but didn't interrupt. The jury sat with narrowed eyes, as though now measuring silence as evidence. Garagos displayed another message. This one after a private jet trip. "Thank you for making me feel special. You're the only one who understands me." "You wrote that," the attorney confirmed. Jane nodded. "Yes, you meant it. I needed to mean it." The phrasing caught Garagos off guard. "Explain that." "I needed to believe there was a version of him that was real, that the tenderness wasn't just a setup for something else." "But he never hurt you physically?" "No." Never raised his voice. No, never forced you to stay. Jane paused. He never forced me. He made sure I thought I didn't have a choice. The distinction puzzled some in the room. Not all. One juror, an older woman with her arms crossed, nodded almost imperceptibly. They shifted to the topic of hotel nights. Jane had referred to them in texts and testimony. Coordinated evenings where Diddy would bring in other men. Escorts, entertainers, sometimes athletes. Jane's role was vague. Sometimes she selected outfits. Sometimes she made introductions. Geragos leaned into the ambiguity. You arranged some of these nights, yes. Jane nodded. Yes. You coordinated timing, clothing, even music playlists. I did. You made the reservations. I did. And you claimed to be a victim. I claimed to be part of a system I didn't understand until it was too late. So you're not taking responsibility. I'm taking all of it, Jane replied, her voice steady now. That's the difference between me and him. The prosecution didn't object. They didn't need to. Jane wasn't unraveling. She wasn't defending herself. She was reframing every question, not with deflection, with explanation. That's when the video came. It was short, less than a minute. Footage from Jane's phone. She had filmed it during a depressive episode, as she described it. In the clip, Diddy could be heard off-screen, his voice soft, repetitive. You're beautiful, you're magic, you're mine. We build each other. You fall, I lift. It was strangely intimate, not romantic, more like a lullaby sung by someone used to fixing broken things by saying beautiful words. Geragos stopped the video. Is this the man you're accusing? No, Jane said. That's the voice he used when the lights were off. And when they were on, Jane took a breath. He didn't speak. He arranged. And you accepted this arrangement at first. Then why return? Jane paused. And for the first time she looked directly at Diddy. The courtroom followed her gaze. Because I thought that if I stayed long enough, she said slowly, I could find the version of him that meant what he said. A long silence followed. A different kind of silence. Not courtroom silence, but human silence. Reflective, uncomfortable, honest. Geragos walked back to her table. The judge called for a recess. Outside, the world moved quickly. Headlines, hashtags, commentary. The clip of Jane's response to the why return question was already viral before the court reconvened. She stayed, trended globally, but inside the courthouse time returned to its own pace. Jane remained on the stand after lunch. Geragos returned slower this time, less about contradiction, more about clarity. Miss Jane, did you ever love him? Jane looked down, then back up. Yes, she said. And do you now? A pause. I love who I thought he could be, not who he chose to be. Somewhere in the room a pen dropped. A subtle sound, but meaningful. Because what Jane had just said wasn't just testimony. It was recognition, but with the unmistakable shift that happens when someone no longer performs. When the mirror cracks. And what's left is not the image, but the truth it was hiding. Afternoon light poured through the tall courthouse windows, slicing across the floor like deliberate lines. The room was quieter than before, not by rule, but by reverence. The testimony had shifted the air. Even the air conditioning seemed to hum differently now. Jane was still on the stand. The defense had returned after recess with new material, documents, receipts, screen captures. But something had changed. No longer was the strategy to provoke or destabilize her. The tone was more restrained now. If Geragos felt a shift, she masked it well. But the room knew. Judge Kelman gave the nod. The jury leaned forward. We're entering into the timeline from March through July. Geragos began holding a stack of printed emails. During this time, you and Mr. Combs exchanged dozens of messages. You traveled to multiple cities. You joined him at events, correct? Jane nodded. Yes. You also, by your own admission, invited him to join you at a charity gala. Yes. Geragos displayed the invitation on the screen. It featured both of their names, printed side by side like a couple. She zoomed in on a caption beneath a photo power pair in Fashion and Philanthropy. You were seen as equals, no. We were never equals, Jane answered. We were cast that way. It's not the same. The word cast lingered. The metaphor of a performance returned stronger this time. Did you ever express concern during this time? Garagos asked. To anyone, your family, friends. A therapist, Jane turned toward the jury. I tried to, but it came out as jokes, sarcasm. Can you believe what I did this week? Because sometimes the truth feels safer when it's disguised as a punchline. You're saying no one knew. No one wanted to know. This moment struck hard. A different kind of indictment, not of the accused, but of a system, of silence, of social contracts that protect charisma over accountability. Garagos moved on. A photograph appeared Jane and Combs at a music festival. She was laughing. He was whispering something into her ear. You look happy here, Garagos said. Jane studied the image. That's because I was told to smile until the camera left, but you laughed. I'm good at pretending. Women are taught early. Garagos opened a folder and removed a new document. This, she said, is a payment record. You received $5,000 for event styling and scheduling fees. This was from Mr. Combs' personal account. Yes, and you accepted it willingly. Yes, was that part of the manipulation too? Jane hesitated. That was me trying to make what was happening feel like a job, not something personal. So it was professional. No, she said clearly. But pretending it was made it easier to sleep. Now came the surveillance footage, an internal video from a luxury hotel lobby. Diddy arrives first. Jane follows a step behind, not speaking. He nods toward the elevator. She follows. No bags, no conversation, just movement. You weren't held against your will, Garagos noted. No. You walked with him. Smiled at the concierge. Yes. So what's the message here, Jane? That survival doesn't always look like resistance. Sometimes it looks like compliance. Another pause, another wait. The jury didn't flinch. They were listening with the kind of focus reserved for people learning a language for the first time. The prosecution finally stood. Your Honor, they said we'd like to redirect. Judge Kelman approved. Jane turned as Assistant U.S. Attorney Melina Choi approached. Her voice was softer, not to coddle, but to respect. Jane, we've heard a lot about text messages, payments, appearances, but let's go back to intent. What did you believe was expected of you during these trips? Jane didn't blink. To manage the night, to make sure everything and everyone was ready. And if I wasn't ready, to pretend I was. What would happen if you said no? Jane glanced down. The mood would shift. Access would be revoked. I'd get silence, then anger, then nothing. And how did that feel? Like I was disappearing in plain sight. Melina paused, let it land. What about the others? The escorts, the performers, did they know? Jane hesitated. Some were professionals. Some were just scared. But I was the one with the phone numbers, the schedules. I arranged things, but I didn't feel in control. Melina nodded. Were you ever told you couldn't say no? Jane's voice dropped. I was never told I could. A hush took over again. Melina leaned closer, not physically but emotionally. Jane, earlier today you were asked why you stayed. Let me ask something else. When did you know you had to leave? The question settled deep in the room. Jane's lips parted slightly. There was a night in Atlanta. 3 rooms booked, 5 people flown in. I walked out to get ice and someone had locked the hallway. Not because I couldn't leave, but because I didn't know if I would come back. And did you? Yes. Why? Because I hadn't planned an exit yet, and it felt safer to stay in the script I knew than rewrite the ending alone. Melina let out a breath. That's all I have. Judge Kelman signaled for court to adjourn for the day, but no one moved, not at first. It ended with a confession most people didn't expect, that sometimes the hardest part isn't the leaving. It's realizing you were gone long before you walked out. As Jane stepped down from the stand, the room remained still. Even the air held its breath. The courthouse emptied slowly that evening, but the story didn't. By the time Jane stepped into her black SUV and disappeared behind tinted glass, the world outside was already burning with opinion. News banners updated live, reaction videos flooded social media, podcast hosts clipped sound bites dissecting them with surgical urgency, and the phrase that echoed loudest across every screen, every phone, every post was the one Jane had whispered on the stand, "I was never told I could." Inside the prosecutor's office, Assistant U.S. Attorney Melina Choi reviewed transcripts in silence. Her laptop glowed in a dim room lined with case files, each labeled, each urgent, but none like this. None as volatile, none as public. She had handled cartel cases, cybercrime trafficking rings. But this was different. Because this time the battlefield wasn't just legal, it was cultural, psychological, symbolic. Across from her lead investigator, Marcus Daniels set down his coffee. "They're already spinning it," he said. "Clips out of context. Headlines flattening everything." Melina nodded. "They're trying to turn survival into seduction. Defense is playing chess. We need to show the board." She looked up. "We will. Not with volume, with pattern." That night, the DOJ's office finalized a list of supplemental witnesses: hotel staff, financial auditors, a former assistant who had quietly come forward with screenshots and journal entries. They weren't accusers. They weren't dramatic. But they could draw the frame. Context was the new strategy. Because if the defense was going to paint Jane as complicit, the prosecution would prove that complicity was manufactured. Meanwhile, outside the court, the public raged in two languages. One loud and defensive, she went along with it. She wanted the lifestyle. "Where's the proof of a crime?" The other, quieter but heavier. "This feels familiar. I've been Jane. This isn't about bruises." At midnight, hashtags split into battle lines. "Chuck free Diddy." Gus Jane was. There too. Survival is not consent. They still don't get it. Public figures weighed in. One pop star tweeted a red heart, then deleted it within an hour. A former senator called the trial a reflection of post-Me Too hysteria. A well-known trauma psychologist posted a thread that went viral in minutes. Abuse isn't always violence. Sometimes it's obedience bought over time, fear without bruises, silence that doesn't scream, control that looks like attention. And through it all, Jane stayed silent. Not because she was afraid, but because for once the world was doing the talking for her. Back in court the next morning, the prosecution was ready. They began with a concierge from the Miami hotel. His name was Luis Delgado, mid-30s, soft voice, neatly dressed. He spoke of guest instructions written not by Combs, but by his assistant Jane. She would email us daily, very detailed. Lighting levels, brand of incense, who could speak to whom. We were told never to contact Mr. Combs directly. And Jane Melina asked, always polite, but you could tell she was scared of getting it wrong. What do you mean she'd call 4 times a day to make sure things were perfect? And if something was off, even a fruit plate, she'd get nervous. Not angry, just tight. Next came a financial auditor, a woman in her 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and a steady tone. She had reviewed 5 years of bank statements, discretionary spending, and wire transfers related to Combs' travel and entertainment. Many bookings were done under Jane's name, she said, but the funds were traced to a corporate shell held by Combs. So she wasn't paying, no. Her name was used, but the money wasn't hers. Then came the quietest witness, Elena Moore, a former assistant to Combs for 2 years. She had left quietly in 2022. No lawsuits, no headlines, just distance. Now she returned with a voice that cracked but never broke. I wasn't abused, she clarified up front, but I saw things that didn't add up. She described Jane arriving for meetings, taking notes, making plans, always calm, always efficient, but also always walking behind. Once I saw her sit outside a hotel room for 4 hours, just waiting. Said she wasn't allowed in yet. I brought her water. She didn't speak. What did she do when the door opened? She stood up, smiled, and went inside like nothing happened. Melina let the silence hold. What did you think that meant? Elena's answer was simple. I thought it meant she knew the rules, even if she didn't write them. Jane, seated silently in the gallery, turned away. Her shoulders rose slightly, then trembled. A quiet gasp. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. For the first time during someone else's truth, her walls cracked. When court recessed for lunch, something had changed. The jury wasn't just listening anymore. They were tracking, mapping, understanding. The defense for the first time didn't object often. Their silence was strategy, yes, but it also revealed something else. A shifting tide. Because now the narrative wasn't just Jane's voice against Diddy's empire. It was the quiet consistency of others. People with nothing to gain, no spotlight to chase. Just truth offered gently. Outside, the tone was changing too. News anchors used phrases like pattern of behavior. Commentators debated legal guilt versus moral control. TikTok videos now stitched Jane's words with testimonies from survivors worldwide. In classrooms, teachers asked students what consent really meant. In boardrooms, HR departments reviewed power dynamics in mentorship policies. And in living rooms, parents watched with their daughters and sometimes looked away. Because whether you believe Jane or not, she had done something undeniable. She had cracked the mirror. And now everyone was looking into it. By the 5th day, the marble floor of the federal courthouse no longer echoed with just footsteps. It echoed with anticipation. The public had moved past curiosity. They were now entrenched. Team Jane, Team Diddy, Team we may never really know. Outside arguments blurred into chants. On the courthouse steps, opposing signs collided like beliefs written in Sharpie. Inside, the courtroom brimmed with a different kind of energy tension, with no clear direction. Diddy entered the chamber that morning slower than usual, his face unreadable, his hands folded loosely in front of him. But his team, his defense had changed tactics. Garagos no longer opened with sharp rhetoric. There was no swagger. Instead, she conferred quietly with 2 new attorneys, seated at the defense table. Public relations strategists turned legal advisors, their presence both intentional and telling. Diddy didn't speak. He hadn't spoken throughout the trial, not in court, not to the media. His silence had once been power. Now it risked being interpreted as distance or worse, calculation. So today they brought someone else to speak. Her name was Karina West, a producer, a collaborator, a former creative director who had worked closely with Combs during Jane's time in his orbit. The courtroom shifted as she took the stand, confident, composed, her blazer sharp as her testimony. I worked with him for 6 years, she said. He demanded perfection, but he was never cruel. Did you ever witness inappropriate behavior? Garagos asked. No. Toward Jane, no. If anything, she had a lot of influence. She coordinated things. He trusted her with access. And did she ever appear distressed to you? Karina shook her head. No. She seemed in control. She was the one giving directions. This testimony wasn't an attack. It was contrast, designed to confuse the clean lines the prosecution had drawn. On cross-examination, Melina Choi approached carefully. Miss West, you said Jane had access, influence, that Mr. Combs trusted her? Yes. Do you believe access guarantees power? Karina hesitated. It depends, because Ms. West, a cage can still have a glass door, can't it? Karina didn't answer. Melina continued. Did Jane ever confide in you? No. Did you ever ask her how she was doing? Silence. Melina nodded. Thank you. No further questions. Next, the defense introduced surveillance screenshots. Jane in a designer boutique. Jane laughing at a private dinner. Jane checking into a spa. "Do these images suggest coercion?" Geragos asked. The jury watched without expression. The images were curated glossy. But the real question wasn't what was shown, it was what wasn't. Prosecutor Daniels leaned into that during redirect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the jury, "let's remember, control doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in gifs, in trips, in visibility wrapped as validation." The jury leaned in. "We're not just prosecuting behavior," Daniels added. "We're prosecuting pattern. And pattern is what turns isolated moments into truth." The prosecution then introduced a key document, Jane's personal calendar obtained through subpoena. Not digital, handwritten, each day filled with symbols, color codes, circles and slashes, asterisks by hotel nights, boxes around therapy appointments later canceled, notes in margins, "Be happy today. Don't flinch. Do not say no tonight." He smiled. "That means the morning will be good." It was the kind of artifact that doesn't prove crime, but proves context. And context was becoming the prosecution's most powerful tool. Outside the courtroom, public opinion had begun to fragment. Talk shows debated the ethics of memory. Columnists dissected power imbalance in high-profile relationships. An op-ed in the New York Times read, "What this trial reveals is not just a single story. It's the shadow system that allows charisma to masquerade as care and silence to be mistaken for satisfaction." Meanwhile, a media leak complicated everything. An anonymous source from within the defense team told a journalist that more intimate footage existed, clips allegedly proving that Jane had initiated more than she admitted. Screenshots surfaced, nothing graphic, but enough to ignite frenzy. The prosecution responded swiftly. Judge Kelman was briefed. A motion was filed to suppress any further use of unauthenticated leaked digital content. But the damage was already cultural. She Lead began trending. Countered within hours by Desktau, she survived. Public confidence now turned on a dime, and in the courtroom, Jane returned to the stand. Not to testify, but to observe. The jury saw her, no emotion, no reaction, just presence. And then a new witness took the stand. Dr. Ayanna Wells, a forensic trauma psychologist retained by the prosecution. Her demeanor was calm, clinical, but her words cut deeper than argument. "Trauma doesn't erase the past," she said. "It blurs the sequence." She explained coercive attachment, a psychological bond formed when the same person causes harm and then offers comfort. Victims may express affection, may return willingly. That is not contradiction, that is conditioning. She explained learned silence. Many survivors don't name what's happening until long after it ends. Why? Because the mind doesn't always prioritize clarity, it prioritizes survival. The defense objected. Speculative. The judge overruled. "Have you reviewed Jane's journals?" the prosecutor asked. "I have. What did you observe, doctor?" Wells glanced at the jury. A woman trying to write herself out of an unwritten contract. The phrase landed. By now the jury wasn't just listening. They were waiting, and the defense knew it. In a quiet moment during break, Tenny Geragos conferred with Combs. He leaned in, listened, then shook his head slowly. There would be no testimony from him, no statement, no cross-examination of the trauma expert. Instead, they filed a motion to exclude Jane's journal as emotional speculation. The judge denied it, because emotion by now wasn't just a byproduct. It was evidence. The trial continued, but the strategy had shifted. The prosecution didn't need to prove that every moment was pain. They only needed to prove that consent wasn't just the absence of force, but the presence of freedom, and Jane She remained still. Because sometimes the loudest thing a person can do is not leave, but stay. It was the final day before deliberation.